recording. Okay, so I have begun recording, and I would like to start by just very nicely welcoming Maria. Maria is the author of this whole series of activities. So simply speaking, some time ago, the story goes, Maria invited us, Polish teachers, to her own virtual room at the time when we didn't even dream of having our own virtual room. Maria invited us, and that was the very first webinar in our series. And that's how it started. And from that moment onwards, every single year, we meet Maria in January, usually the third week of January, and she tells us, inspires us with her expertise. Today, Maria is going to tell us something about the problems that we all encounter. Are we teachers? Are we learners? Or are we teachers and learners at the same time? And she has enumerated in her summary of the webinar, she has enumerated a few questions which we all keep seeking answers to, but it is very difficult to find answers to these questions. A few words about Maria for those of you who are here for the first time. As she wrote in her bio, she's practicing English foreign language teacher, but she's at the same time also a lecturer in the English Studies Department of City College, the Europe campus of the University of York. She's also the owner of but also managing director of Input on Education. That's where we had our first webinar in this virtual room. And Maria frequently presents at conferences. That's how we met at IATEFL Poland conference, and writes articles related to her special research interests, which are materials evaluation, their adaptation, digital teaching, also the construction of teacher identity. So the whole wide range of interests. Maria was heavily, or has been heavily involved with the running of TESOL Macedonia race, Northern Greece, and she serves on the IATEFL membership committee. So over to you.
Dobry wieczór, Polska. I'm always so happy to be here, and I can't describe how much I've missed Poland, a nice heartwarming dish of pierogi, which are my favorite, and just walking in the streets of my favorite Krakow. And I am waiting for COVID to be over, and in the meantime, I keep up with my radio listening. I must say that because of my busy schedule, I haven't progressed much with my Polish, but I'm still reading and I'm still learning. So yay, there is hope for me. And I'm waiting for Book Depository to deliver my a new set of short stories in Polish so that I can keep reading and learning. So I just hope and wish that next year conferences can be back to normal and we can be together again. I know that technology has done something miraculous for us. It kept us employed. It kept us busy at a time when we would have been totally and utterly jobless and well, moneyless actually, but conferences are not the same. I mean, I love this opportunity and it's great for webinars, but for conferences, I just hope that we can come back to Poland at some point. So thank you so much for this wonderful, generous invitation. And today's session has to do with this thing. In Greek, we use the word learn in a kind of transitive way. So instead of saying, I will teach you, we say, I will learn you. Like I can learn on behalf of someone else. And parents use that when they speak to teachers a lot. Can you learn my child instead of can you teach my child how to do this? And I'm afraid that this leads to a great misconception. It leads to a whole array of problems that have to do with how we perceive our work. Might I say at this point that as teachers, we tend to be a bit on the guilty side, let's say. We assume responsibility for just about everything. And that might come from the fact that, it might stem from the fact that we control our classes, we control our syllabi, but well, to what extent can we control learning? So this is what I'm planning to cover today. God be with me. I'm not sure I will manage to cover everything, but I will try my best. The first is an introduction. If there is a possibility of us working in breakout rooms, we will. I put it in brackets. If not, we are going to use the chat and discuss it. Or if you can use your microphones, we can have a little brainstorming session all together. It's very important for us to see how learners in different settings of the ELT classroom that we have come to understand in a generic way are different. Then we are going to think of how learning happens, what goes on in our brain, in our soul when we learn, and connect that to what makes teaching successful. And then we are going to pose a question: what might make learning fail? Is it always bad teaching that leads to bad learning? Could good teaching lead to bad learning? And then this will give us the opportunity to discuss factors that hinder learning. And then we're going to look into how homework works in all that. And then I'm going to present some activities that I have found inspiring in this framework. So without further ado, I'm not sure if we can use breakout rooms, but I'm not going to make too much of it because I don't want to spend time on that, trying to sort out the mechanics of it, I mean. In which ways are our classes diverse? Which individual differences do we notice between amongst our learners? Try to think of anything and all possible differences and use the chat. I will now look at the chat, or you can use your microphones if that is easy for you to do. So I'm looking forward to your answers. How are EFL classes diverse? In which ways are our learners different from each other? Thank you, Ursula. Yes, different learning styles. Male, female, yes. Don't be shy. We're all teachers. Different background, different experiences, different attitudes to life, ethnic, religious. The matter of flexibility, which has a lot to do with attitude to learning. Excellent responses, really, really helpful for what I'm going to say in a while. Anything else that you may have noticed?
Different
Motivation.
upbringing.
Yes, of course. And that has to do with the background, the learning difficulties as well. And learning difficulties, speed of learning, how learning can be, let's say, slowed down, and how that might make the teacher's life really difficult. And there's an ethical dilemma there, which might become a very practical dilemma, especially if there are parents who make the teacher's life difficult. So you're going more slowly, you cover the material in a less speedy way because you have students with learning difficulties, but my child doesn't get the best that he or she could get out of this class. Totally agree with you, Anastasia. Motivation and how sustained it is, because motivation might be to the extent that I get that tablet that my parents promised me, or can I run the marathon of a proficiency class and stand the test of time and face the effort of investing in mock test after mock test with questionable results sometimes. Only yesterday, one of my star students didn't manage her time and her reading was a disaster. So thank you. Exposure with people of different races. Yes, attention span. Excellent. Thank you so much. You've all given me plenty to elaborate on. And this brings us to the next slide. So I tried to put these into, let's say, categories, the different learning styles. There was a thing at some point when I started working as a consultant, whenever I ran a workshop on teaching so that we can cater for diverse classrooms and different learning styles, school owners would ask me, do you suggest that we advise teachers to lesson plan for visual learners, and then another lesson for kinesthetic, and then another lesson for auditory? This is a misconception. First of all, we are all everything. And this is also affected by age. Young learners are like 90% visual and kinesthetic. Also, auditory learners tend to be slightly older, slightly more mature, because it takes a lot of attention, and I will use a term that is not actually a term, listening fluency, my ability to concentrate for long minutes so that the speaker can actually present the rationale and allow me to draw conclusions. This is exactly what you're doing right now. You're using your procedural, your working memory to decode what I'm saying, but you're focusing. You might be taking notes, you might be nodding, you might be thinking, but at the same time, you're waiting for me to finish. If I was teaching a group of young learners and it took me like 7 minutes to give them the floor and get them to do something, I suppose they would have been climbing on the curtains of my classroom. They would have left the classroom, but something along these lines. So no, we cannot plan for different, we cannot create a visual lesson plan, but we can use the material that we are given in our students' book in a visually creative way. We can turn things around so that they are more kinesthetic. And of course, we can include auditory activities from the simplest, which also combines movement, rapping instead of repeating, and making things more memorable. You've all pointed out the learning, what the CEFR and the portfolio name the learning history or the learning biography of the learner. This also defines the attitude of the learner. The learning biography could be a straight line and a line of successes. It could be a line that actually curves with highs and lows. It could be a totally confusing zigzag crisscrossing of different things. But all of these also involve where the learner started learning. Was this an immersion program? They also involve the reasons why the learner started learning, and if the same reasons apply. The third would be how he or she perceives learning, and also how he or she perceives his own learning heritage and his own learning abilities. So as we can see, there are quite a lot of things in our learning biography. I will come back to that when I present the last bullet point. I believe learning difficulties have been one of the things that most teachers feel very confused about. In my country, things are a bit better these days because parents do not feel that this is a stigma. But at the same time, I sometimes feel that the teachers are afraid that if they tell parents about learning difficulties, the parents might be offended, and no school has ever gained out of telling parents who didn't want to see the truth about their child, or this is going to be used against them if need be. So yes, we got our kid evaluated, and it was found that after many tests, he or she has some kind of dyslexia, heavy, slight, whatever. And then this is used as a reason to justify just about all kinds of lack of attention to the progress of the course and lack of personal engagement. There are also personality issues. We can see that especially with older learners or adults. They come to class ready to put the slightest bit of language in use. Personally, I find that the sooner I put something in use, the better it is. Recently, I realized that if training is to work, we should do the same. If we attend a training session, we should try to use at least one of these ideas within the first week after this training session. Otherwise, we will never remember anything and never apply any of the things that we picked up from this. Next one is the communicative readiness of the speaker. And this has to do with their personality. It's not actually communicative competence. We are ready to speak when we feel the confidence to take control of the discussion. At this point, I would like to relate my personal feelings. Lucina knows the story because I've related my experience many times. So whenever I'm in Poland, usually for an IATEFL Poland conference, nobody speaks to me in Polish. Obviously, I'm shortish, chubby, brown-haired. I don't look Polish. And when I'm in a coffee shop, of course, people speak to me in English. And I reply in Polish, holding my breath that I don't make a pronunciation mistake. And I go slowly and I look at them. I've even tried that at the train station when I was buying my ticket. No, I will stick to Polish. Help me, I'm an A2 speaker. I need to practice in a real environment. And I will very rarely try to, diverge from that. It's a real uphill struggle, not easy at all, but it doesn't happen. There are other students who are given the structure. We really spoon feed them. It's a kind of drilling task, and yet they don't say anything. They refuse to put language to test. The last one, and this has to do with higher levels of the CEFR. I would say this starts from A2-ish, B1-ish level upwards. The actual level of the learner is not always the nominal level of the CEFR in which he or she is studying. When learners are in what we have not yet charted, an A0 level, learning first reading and writing, playing with flashcards, acquiring the cipher, learning whole word recognition, the phonics and all of that. At this point, it's very difficult to find, unless there is a great bit of learning difficulty, it's very difficult to see differences, discrepancies in between the two, the nominal level and the actual level. But learning history intervenes. And as learners grow, they sometimes quit and come back, or they study harder during certain years, and then they are less motivated the next year, or they have other problems and they give up at some point and they take up at another point. So this means that although they are in B2 level and preparing, let's say, for an FCE exam, they are actually struggling with B1 level yet, still, and they haven't managed it yet. So this causes problems, especially when we try to chart the level of our class. Now, if we add to this the fact that we may have quite a few learners in our country, especially in the private sector, we have COVID to thank, but this has been, scraped out as a reason. We get really low numbers in classes these days, but still, it is a problem. It is an issue when the class is quite large. So what we see is that the flora and fauna is diverse, and we teach in very rich environments in which one size does not fit all. But the great contrast here is that we want alignment. We want the teacher to say something, present a structure, and boom, in a lockstep way, all the sheep toe the line and they learn the structure. No, unfortunately, it doesn't happen. The reason for that is that every brain learns in a different way. Might I add at this point that as teachers of English, most of us are we are disadvantaged. How many of us actually had classes in how the brain learns? How many of us were given the chance to study what forgetting is, what remembering is, or the neurological processes of learning? hardly any, if at all. So the next slide is actually something that we all have seen, but it applies. So, okay, my students cannot learn the way I teach them. I expect alignment, but alignment doesn't work. So what should I do about that? Well, reconsider alignment in this case. Reconsider the fact that lockstep teaching can work. In fact, we have an array of research evidence that tells us that lockstep teaching doesn't work. This is why it's on its way out in the greatest universities the world over. Lecture style, amphitheater-based courses with nobody asking questions, a poor soul trying to present material to the few who care and the rest watch Netflix, doesn't really do anything. So what do we need to do? Well, adjust our way of teaching. And in order to do that, we have to see what learning is all about.
Hello. Maria has somehow disappeared, so she's frozen. Maybe there is some problem with the connection. Let's wait. Hello. Can everybody hear Maria? Because I can't. So maybe it's my...
No, we can't hear her too.
Okay, so just a moment. I'm sure that she will rejoin us. I see that she has also disappeared from the screen. Yes, she's back. She's back. We can't hear you, Maria.
There is a very good reason for that. I was muted. So apologies for that. I had a problem with my internet connection. So as I was saying, learning is personal, but it social constructivism explains that we construct knowledge. We actually create it for ourselves. And this actually fits in with what we were saying about the learning biography. We narrate our own learning. We interact with the material we are going to learn. And through the group within which we learn, we find out more and we understand it more and deeper depth. Also, our learning is affected by the other people. Are the other people supportive? Teacher included in this group. Is the group highly competitive? Is all the group geared towards learning, or are there any people who are there just to please their parents and they don't care? So they just want to waste time. Is the group of, are the participants in this group of equivalent strength and personality makeup, so that we can have the best, let's say, of the two worlds? And there is a question about homeschooling. I'm afraid this might be a good topic to discuss next year, because homeschooling is such a big area. I must tell you, I am keeping the idea of self-organized learning environments and how they work for when IATEFL Poland is back in Krakow, because I want to talk about my personal experience of teaching myself a language I don't know in Krakow, where it all started. But it's all related, creating an environment in which children learn from their parents has a lot to do with learning and self-organized learning environments. It depends on the parents, on their experience of teaching, but personally, I feel that even if the parents are teachers, it's better to keep the two roles separately. There is no reason for parents to become teachers. Now, unschooling, define unschooling, not having schools at all, having schools of a different kind. My dream is to have schools of a different kind. But I believe Sir Ken Robinson said everything, kill creativity, and how we have no idea how to construct those schools of the 21st century because we do not know what the 21st century is going to be, and we don't even know now when we near the second half of the 21st century. So I hope I've asked the question, but thank you for the great inspiration. I might consider it for next year. So learning is deeply social, and the quality of interaction gives a lot to the learners, not only as feedback, but also as feed forward as well. Learning happens through interaction. Therefore, learning cannot be static. It cannot be controlled and led by the teacher to the extent that the only interaction is teacher, student, student, teacher, and or teacher to the whole group. Interaction patterns are a very important aspect of our work. Getting the students to work in pairs, to work in groups. We will actually talk about this strategy, the think, pair, share strategy, makes weak students participate more, strong students share their power, and we maximize learning outcomes. And we also give learners more time to speak, which is very important. Needless to say, learning is deeply cognitive, but for my mind to work and my cognition to work, I need to be in an emotional situation where I don't feel threatened, where I do not suffer from any affective filter factors which are going sky high because I am being judged all the time, or I'm not being tested all the time, which can also negatively affect learning. Learning is deeply emotional, and there are a variety of examples for that. One of these is how much better our learners do when they like the topic they are going to talk about. I will present this idea again when we do the activities, when I take you through the activities. Learners experience this burning passion to speak about something. They are passionately devoted to what they do, to the point that sometimes they run out of language. They might even resort to L1 because their thoughts run faster than their words and their vocabulary. But this is a good feeling. They are investing, they are there. The lesson becomes memorable. It's not just a bunch of use of English tasks. When the sum of our weekly classes is a bunch of A's and B's and C's and multiple choice items, then nobody will remember, nobody will engage emotionally. And it's not language teaching, it's exam cramming, and it should be used cautiously. In the meantime, we've had another question about private lessons. Personally, I don't disregard or look down on private lessons. I teach privately.
I don't mean private. I meant is individual classes.
How do you mean individual? You mean, can you explain the term?
Because at the moment I am only working, I have group classes, but only 2 groups, but most of my classes are one-on-one.
Okay, so in that way, how is private different from one-to-one? If you can clarify the situation for me.
Not private, because I'm not my own employer. I work for
so
someone else. That's what I meant.
I understand. So my private lessons, some of my private lessons are not mine, so they're not part of my business. My employer from the foreign language school where I work has made the deal, but I teach these. I feel there is a place and a need for them. For example, I've had adults who cannot fit in they do not feel they can follow a class of secondary school students who have different cognitive needs. They have a different timetable. They also have, let's say, different time available to take the exam. I also have a lot of lessons which are very, content specific. And for this, we do need a special class, for example, IELTS classes or academic English classes or IB writing classes. These are very specific courses. Now, sometimes private lessons might work along with the classes that run, and this is because certain students need further support. What I would say about private classes is that as long as we plan them properly and we use our full range of skills when we plan, they can work well and interaction can be there. My only fear is that there are times when, and I speak solely about my country, there are times when teachers take up this opportunity so that they can teach extra grammar, let's say. And to be honest, I am sick and tired of this notion that if we teach students extra grammar and we give them more grammar exercises, their fluency will develop. It won't. We need other steps and stages to help their fluency. So if the private or individual class is planned so as to cater to the needs of the learner, and if the material is used in the best possible way, private lessons can yield great results, especially if the learners need it. And another reason might be learning difficulties, or even learners who have some social issues. I wouldn't call them necessarily psychological problems, but students who do not feel comfortably learning within a group. And this should be an option for them, I believe.
If I may,
Of course.
add something. My comment was in regard to when you mentioned cooperating with other students. In terms of yielding results, I'm quite happy with the results that I am yielding as far as I have control over the program. When it comes to the group students, I don't have control because this is FCE, CAE, IELTS preparation, and etc. And you know that the language school has a lot of control over what is being taught. When it comes to my little ones, I have a lot more control, and I'm yielding. Well, I think I am yielding. I would like to think
I'm sure you are.
It's about the fact that sometimes I do think that I wish I could get them to come out of their shell, out of their comfort zone when it comes to communicating with others, because I'm a bit worried that the individual classes give them this comfort zone, and then when faced with dealing with other individuals, they are not able to do so. This is my question.
You could perhaps find some artificial ways of overcoming that. For example, one would be that the language of our class is English, and we resort to L1, if at all, or another language spoken in the country where the lesson takes place, only if worst comes to worst, in no other case. Secondly, perhaps you could find somebody, a pen pal from the rest of the school, a boy or a girl that would be a good match for your student, and if they can exchange emails or they can do projects. For example, I usually ask for favors from my students, sometimes from older students, when they need to take their oral exams. I want to be the examiner, I want to be the assessor. I do not want to have to interact with the learners, because that makes me less observant and less able to see how the learners improvise, how they get out of the sticky situations. So I get other students who are not part of our group. They know the routine, or they benefit a lot from learning the routine of the speaking exam, and they try out. Usually these situations bring about great friendships. Perhaps, you know, an individual class student pairs up with one of the students from the group. They have a speaking thing together for a couple of weeks, you know, half an hour now and half an hour then. And then in the next year, they are both in a C1 class, and they become friends because they know each other. And this is a good way, but you could do it with perhaps remote ways. And this would be extra practice for the other child and extra practice for the child in the individual class. Personally, whenever I teach one-to-one, I think that I am the other participant. So if we have to debate, I'm the other debater, I'm the other side. And since there is no testing and I don't have to take notes, I am an active participant. I hope I have answered your question. I know it's a really difficult situation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. So let's see if we have any other comments. If anyone can interact, Sorry, I hope you find a partner to interact daily. It's not always easy. Okay, so just to see what happens in our brains and in our soul when we learn, let's take things from the basic, from the roots, let's say. Information arrives to our brain through our senses. So our learners listen to sounds, they see things written on the whiteboard, they watch videos. All of these are taken through the neurons, they are taken to the brain centers and they are decoded. In order for the information to be decoded, it needs to be processed. And this is the point where procedural or working memory intervenes. And what this does is a preliminary check. It goes like, okay, you're there, you're there, you're there. But in order for procedural memory to do that, it needs to understand what we are feeding it. I'll give you an example. This is a session for teachers of English on how learning happens and how we can scaffold learners learning better, learning and teaching. If accidentally one of us hit the wrong link and we joined, I don't know, aeronautics session on, I don't know, some very clever type of engine. And they were talking about bits of airplane engines. We would probably be, what? And of course, we wouldn't be able to store this knowledge anywhere for lack of reference. This knowledge that we would get, so highly specialized, so scientific, would have nowhere to go. And this goes to show why learning can be highly stressful. When information starts arriving to the brain, but the brain fails to decode it, the brain doesn't understand. Procedural memory is at a loss. What am I getting? What is this Chinese I'm getting? Or should I say, what is this Greek I'm getting? Then the person experiences a sort of struggle because more information keeps coming and now there's a traffic jam. Unfortunately, the information comes in chunks, and this is part of the success of a teacher's presentation. How do we chunk our material? It is also part of the success of the courses, of the material writer's success in understanding how to take the chaos that is language, chop it up in little meaningful units, and meaningfully present these units all along thinking of ties to connect those units with one another. So the question is really easy. What happens when the bit cannot be understood? It is lost. The working memory can keep it for up to 10, 11 seconds. Unless it is understood, it will be permanently lost. And if bits and more bits come and nothing is stored, then they cannot be retrieved. Now, once things have been properly stored, and when I say stored, I need to explain that. I would like you to think of a huge tree. And I would like you, and I apologize to friends because I've seen some of my friends who have been to another of my training sessions, and I use the same example, but it's the best one I can think of. So my analogy is a century-old tree with a huge trunk and huge branches. Each of these branches is like a mini tree, and it's got more branches and more branches. But don't think of leaves at the end of these branches. Think of filing cases. Those filing cases would be the place, so the branches, the trunk would be knowledge, and the branches would be fields of knowledge, and every branch of those branches would be the specific part, and there would be the filing cases. Now, if the student has never created filing cases, it's like trying to store information, a file that you created on a computer that has no spare space or has no hard drive. So you have no place to store. Okay, you can store on the cloud, but unfortunately, human memory doesn't work like that. We don't have a cloud in which to store. So unless we actually know what this is that we are learning, and unless it is presented in a meaningful context that actually tells learners something, they're going to lose it. Now, just because we've stored it, we haven't finished. It's not learned. It is, let's say, recognized. It is understood in a specific context. Now we need to introduce repetition. And when I say repetition, I use the term loosely. I don't want to appear like we are spending a whole hour going again and again, rote learning structures or repeating vocabulary so that we can commit it to memory. But different elements of form-focused tasks and, let's say, freer tasks that focus more on communication can lead to what we call automaticity. So a bit of competence, communicative competence, starts developing at this point. It's also what builds communicative readiness and what prepares learners to face the real world and interact in the real world. So communicative readiness is, let's say, the learner's ability to construct the structure in a timely fashion so that it can be properly understood, even if clarification or a kind of momentary hesitation on the part of the respondent is required. This is very important. Communicative readiness is not our learners, let's say, stubbornness to insist on waiting for 5 minutes to come up with a perfect word. If you're in an international airport and you wait for 5 minutes to think of the perfect word, probably your communicative instance has vanished. Believe me, I know. So we need to remember that repetition also needs to be meaningful, and it needs to be liberating. This very traditional freer practice and then production should not be so out of our minds, even if we adjust it in a more Jeremy Harmer way: engage, study, activate. But in order to activate the structure, we need to give a meaningful context. So all of these show that every bit that we learn facilitates the next learning. And this is what we call positive transfer. Positive transfer prepares the brain for the next part of learning. It creates little hooks for learning. To give you a mathematical analogy, it's very difficult for primary school students to solve problems where they have to add, subtract, divide, if they haven't mastered any of these, or the multiplication table. To give an ELT example, a learner who is confused, who is constantly confusing, let's say, past perfect with present perfect, with future perfect, will have a very difficult time figuring out indirect speech or passive voice, or even conditionals. So this is not that they're not, this explains why learners who keep failing, who keep missing chunks, cannot jump onto the train again. And this is why lockstep teaching cannot work, because we are not all at the same pace and we're not all communicatively ready. So as we have shown so far, there is no one-to-one correlation between what I teach and what my students learn. A very easy way of finding this out is to ask learners at the end of the class, what did we learn today? What was today's lesson about? Unless you have presented a nice overview, and even if you have presented a nice overview, you will get very diverse answers. Once I did that, and some of my students said, we did a bit of grammar, nothing about the rest of the things that we had done. One of them said it was about football because we had used, the context was football. And the other said something that was, just a fraction of the lesson. So it's very important to see that every learner perceives the lesson in a different way. The teachers can control their teaching, but actually it's the learner that controls his or her learning. Now, I want to be hopeful, and as a teacher, I do believe that we take steps to ensure that successful learning can take place. Teaching that has been meticulously planned and actively consolidated and thought over in a reflective way can be converted into learning. But the more motivated the learners, the more the learners contribute, the better the results and the quicker they will appear. If the teacher is trying, let's say, despite of the learners or against the learners, then this is going to be more difficult. That also points out the emotional aspect of learning. We cannot teach anybody who doesn't want to learn. Lack of motivation needs to be addressed separately. Lack of bonding in the classroom needs to be addressed separately. I can do very little to influence people who do not want to be influenced by me, who do not want to be in my class. And also, we need to remember that there are many points in my lesson, in every lesson, and even more spots within the year when I can lose the learners. I might not lose them while we are, let's say, correcting homework or doing things with which they are familiar. I might lose their attention if I hold on to presenting for too long. And that's exactly what I said before when I said that if I had a young learners class right now, they would have left. I would be alone presenting here. So what does successful learning look like? You can already see Bloom's taxonomy. Successful learning, I'm trying to fit the window with the screen so that I can see the slides. Successful teaching of languages should be about producing language, not describing the linguistic system, not talking about the language, worrying too much and spending too much time on rules and using top-heavy meta language when we present grammar usually confuses learners, creates more opportunity for us to lose the engagement of the learners, and this also creates problems in speaking. It's exactly what I said before. Grammar practice is needed, but it should be cautiously used, and then it should be supported and accompanied with some freer practice and production tasks so that the learners can actually put this to good use. So there should be some balance between form-focused practice and fluency or skills work. Personally, I feel that grammar books should, or should we say use of English books, should change their concept. We need materials that look into the essence of what language is and then filter structures that we can teach. There are some good examples of such course books, grammar books out there, and they really work wonders because they help the learners listen to the structure, read a text that contains the structure, and actually produce a text that contains this structure. And in some cases, this is done in a most artful way. Immediate application can guarantee that we keep what we have taught. Don't use and you lose. It's very easy to forget. Also, let's not forget, and this is one of the issues we will discuss, fragmentation. We present chunks, okay? Even within a unit from a course book, we present chunks of language. If we keep insisting on the chunks and we don't find a way to unify these, our life is going to be very difficult. And this is where I would like us to look at Bloom's taxonomy. In most cases, when we work with grammar or vocabulary tasks, what we do is work with the lower order thinking skills, and we get up to apply. So use what I have taught you so that you can do a transformations task or a close passage or a gap filling task, and that's it. Or apply these and do a task, even if it's not an exam practice task. This is not enough, though, because in real life, they will have to do a lot more with the language. And they also fall victims of what is the one-word answer trap. The one-word answer trap is what happens when we spend 90 minutes teaching, using the course book to do tasks. The students get to say one word per sentence, the word that is missing, or they get to say, let's say, one structure per sentence, but they don't actually take it out for a spin, use it to express meaning. Personally, I've seen great difference both in my vocabulary and structure teaching when I started using examples, some of my students rolled their eyes all the time. They're like, oh, not again. And I'm like, yes, again. And then they become competitive and they start trying to combine more structures and more examples from the vocabulary in one example. And some of them take it really, they're really passionate. So we need to move on. We need to see what these structures can produce. How can we get the learners to analyze, to take apart what they are studying, and actually prioritize and see how these bits create a new whole so that they can use their higher order thinking skills. But in order to do all that, learners need to be present and assume responsibility for their own learning. How can we do that? Well, first of all, monitor our teacher talking time versus student talking time. To maximize these, we need learners to work in pairs, to work in groups. We need to avoid lecturing. We need to break down, get the learners, I mean, in levels A1, A2 and upwards, get the learners to notice, work in a top-down way. So learners start within the language, they have the meaning, and make grammar teaching even, a bit more immersed. Forget about the rules, forget about teaching the structure and giving learners something, some kind of term. Get them to experience the structure. Use a story to get them to experience the structure. So once again, we're going to look at what hinders learning, but we're going to see it from the aspect of the factors that we discussed. So what hinders learning is lack of personal involvement. And there's very little point in, calling parents, threatening, giving extra homework. I mean, if somebody doesn't do the homework they have, giving them extra homework is not going to make them more motivated. Contrary to that, the situation becomes even worse because they feel they keep receiving a negative image of themselves, and this builds up. So it creates further demotivation. What we need to do is get to know our learners, map our class within the first few lessons. The 4 first lessons of the year are really important. They allow us the chance to get our learners to appreciate the language. They can work with material that we devise so that we can see specific things. How good are they in working in teams? Does it take them half of the lesson to move around? Are they capable of taking notes during group work? What do I need to get them to understand what they do? And do they continue speaking while the others present? How do they react when the topic is unfamiliar? Are they able to sustain this level of motivation, even if they don't understand, until the time comes for them to understand? Do they speak English? Do they take risks? All of these, each one of us could devise his or her own personal checklist for those first 4 lessons. And in a way, these create, let's say, our first diet. What do we need to give our learners to help them become self-organized? And also, it's very important for us teachers to get to know the mentality of the learner, to get to see how they view learning. Being a teacher who teaches exam classes in my school, I often have to tell my learners, you have to relearn, unlearn, and now relearn certain things. And this causes them a bit of insecurity at first, but then they realize that it's a new level and they have to become familiar with other ways of learning. Learning is social, as we said, and one of the factors that can hinder learning is, for example, negative climate in the classroom, bullying, lack of support and lack of ability of the learners to communicate within their group. And this also needs to be noticed. We also need to address from the beginning disparities between the learners, especially if there are great differences. So if we have, let's say, a group of 6 students in which 5 of the learners are great and there is one learner who is not as great as the others, then we don't have a problem. If we have one learner who's really, really strong and confident, has all the positive traits, and then we have various levels of weakness and decomposure in the other students, how are we going to work with that? And really, for all of us that work in a school, we shouldn't take responsibility to solve this puzzle on our own. This should become a matter that we bring to the attention of our DOS. We discuss it. There is very little we can do for fixed mentalities and for a level of English that cannot progress unless we teach them. And in order to teach them, we need to overcome this issue of lack of interaction. Learning is cognitive. So one of the things that I really have to do is ensure that my learner's brain is in an optimal condition. The conditions in the classroom, are they comfortable? Do they get to shake their heads every now and then, stretch their legs, move about? Is there enough oxygen in our rooms, especially now with all the masks and the ones with the filter and the very tight elastic bands? Sometimes it becomes torture to wear this mask for such long hours. We also need to present the material in the way they understand it. If the material is not presented in a way they can engage with, they will disengage. I need to provide things they like, but also I need to get them to respond emotionally, and at the same time, teach them that they shouldn't only do the parts of the homework they like, or work better on topics they like and disregard the topics they don't like. Once my proficiency students told me, we didn't like that text, it was about this and that that is such a boring topic. And I told them, okay, let me know which exam you're taking so that I can order the topics you're taking. They laughed, and then they realized that I was, it was a joke, and it is really a joke. We have little control over the topics they will deal with. So they have to be able to deal with everything. We have to teach so that our learning creates less confusion, more clarity, and positive transfer. In order to do that, we need to, in a way, chunk our presentation and get the learners to become more involved in every step of the teaching. Finally, we need to avoid fragmentation as much as we can. Teaching bits doesn't automatically translate, doesn't automatically convert to learning. So what might hinder learning? Of course, stress, high affective filter factors, learning that is not scaffolded, that is not supported. And this starts with the teacher. As teachers, we need to teach them learning to learn strategies. We even need to organize their studying at times. We need to show them how to use even, the easiest thing, sticky notes so that they can remember things, or how to study vocabulary, which they, even at proficiency level, they insist on memorizing from glossaries or companions. The climate of the classroom, the extreme control of the teacher on the class, and teacher-led lessons to the point that the students have no time to speak to each other. And as I mentioned, no learning to learn strategies. In short, through our classroom teaching, we need to lead the learners to independent learning. In September, when we at the IATEFL Poland conference, what I presented had to do with teaching during the first lockdown, the first and the second lockdown. And one of the things that I noticed during those lockdowns was how unprepared our digital natives were to learn digitally. Although the expectations should be and were that this is their native ground. They know this land like the palm of their hand. It turns out that they only know digital if it's concerned and if it's related with entertainment. If not, it's as much a foreign land as any course book, any grammar book, any kind of, let's say, self-consuming and self-absorbing kind of learning. So personally, I feel as teachers, we need to invest more in independent learning. The attitude of the learners needs to change. They need to become more self-observant, and we need to guide them to that. We need to explain which part of their learning can be controlled by us and what needs to be part of their effort, and how this helps them develop their ability to keep learning while they're out there, and also how their questions and their inquisitive nature can help their learning and strengthen the outcomes of what they learn. If the learners ask questions, and I don't mean questions because they didn't understand something about vocabulary or they didn't understand something about grammar, I mean mainly if the whole lesson is built around the learner's questions, let's say as an introduction, as a lead into a reading text or a listening text, this engages them more because it's part of their soul and it's part of their curiosity. Unfortunately, and I speak only about Greek youths, I see curiosity dying. There is a lot of certainty out there. Young people who doubt everything, who understand why language of caution is necessary in essay writing, are few and far between, unfortunately. What will we benefit from all that? Well, first of all, we have learners who understand the part they play in their own learning. And this leads them to study how they learn. In my country, if I ask any of my learners, how do you learn? What are your preferred ways of learning? They will look at me and go like, oh, I learn. I open the book, I read, I learn by heart, I learn. And they don't even wonder if there are other ways of learning. And when I explain to them that we have a set of course books consisting of a student's book, a workbook, a use of English book, perhaps a companion, that these books are a chain that links the different parts, and you have pages that mirror each other. So use of English 1 mirrors the page from the student's book is mirrored in the workbook and in the companion, and there is no, oh, miss, I didn't find that, because everything can be found if you research. They look at me, really? I could do that? It's not a problem if I open the companion, it's not a problem if I look it up. It's not a test. You have to learn how to research. You have to monitor yourself and see what goes into your own learning. How do you learn? Do you learn by taking notes? Do you learn by looking at the notes for a couple of days? So you need to create mini posters and use your Post-it notes. Do you learn if you revise more frequently? So they need to understand that
Aniu,
learning is...
wysuszyłaś włosy?
Sorry, your microphones.
Boże, ty się przeziębisz. Z mokrymi włosami tyle siedzieć.
Sorry, your microphones. And this increases their motivation, because obviously this creates greater, better performance. Better performance is rewarded, and this reward translates into a feeling of elation and enhanced confidence in themselves. But ultimately, they learn something very important. They learn how to manage their own learning. You can find more about independent learning in a book. I'm not sure if if the publisher deals in Poland, but I work for this publisher and I love those books. Gold Experience C1 is by Pearson Longman, York Press in Greece, and the teacher's book is really one of those diamonds that has so much in it, and it gives teachers a great deal. Now, very frequently, we hear about homework being the big bad wolf, the wolf that has destroyed learning, and how it eats up the time of the learners and they have no free time. I would like to say that homework is a version, it's part of independent learning. Independent learning wouldn't occur if we didn't have homework. So it's an opportunity to assimilate what has been taught in class. My problem is not whether or not we will have homework. And there might be a few lessons within the year that learners have no homework. The problem is what kind of homework we have, how much of it we assign, and how we assign it. For one thing, much like with our teaching, there should be balance. Too many grammar tasks means that we spend an inordinate amount of time in the next lesson checking exercises, which means that we are back to what we were saying before, the trap of one-word answers for the learners. And if we don't correct those tasks, why did the learners do them in the first place? So what we need to assign is something that makes sense and keeps all the components in track so that they can progress together. Sometimes I hear many of my clients say, well, you know, we keep the workbook for the end of the unit, but it's too much. And this causes you to slow down. And in the meantime, the learners miss out on valuable practice that should have been better received and would make greater sense if it was if it worked in unison with the actual student book part. Now, most course books have given us way too much material in the last decade, I would say. These days, with the microsites and the extra PDFs and the downloadables, we are spoiled for choice. I don't think we should keep material and work on it later. Chances are we won't work with it because we need to move on. So for learners who are really low level, so juniors, young learners, A0 to A2, A0 doesn't formally exist, but just to give you an indication, we need to make homework a safe thing. They need to understand what they're going to do, even perhaps if the class is weak, scaffold this by doing the first. So study the example, what do you have to do, and then get them to do the first one in class so that they know what they are doing. The material should feel safe so that the learners don't feel that they are all out at sea. From A2 onwards, we can apply some flipped classroom practices. An example I can give, in my B1 classes and onwards, I try to present the types of reading tasks once, and then from that point onwards, I start assigning the reading for homework. The reason for that is that due to learning differences, discrepancies in level, speed of reading, attention span, and all the things that you mentioned in the beginning of this session, learners do not read at the same speed. So if I do it in class, some learners will not read, or they will read it so quickly it doesn't sink in, so they cannot really do any reading comprehension tasks. And if they do, they will fail them. The stronger learners will have moved on and they will have answered the questions as well. So in order to negotiate the two, I assign it. Of course, as with all flipped classroom activities, I run the risk of having students who don't do the reading, but I take this into consideration. I factor it in my anticipated problems, and I include a little bit of reading. So I give them, let's say, 5 minutes to go through the text quickly. Not that this is enough, but at least it gives them a refresher, a chance to brush up on the text and remember what they read. And in this case, the case of A2 plus to C2 level, we can also use homework to present, to give them a chance to practice their learning to learn strategies. One way of doing this is to ask our learners who have been successful in doing something, present your strategy. How did you think of that? How did you work it out? For me, the greatest plus out of all this effort is that it keeps parents out of my homework. The feeling that learners, my learners, do not know what they are doing, they do not know how they're going to do it, and they go running to their parents, who are either extremely angry and they cause problems for me, or extremely fed up and they just do the homework instead of providing a clarification, perhaps, is my nightmare. So for me, the more scaffolding we provide, the better the homework is going to be done. And of course, we should mind the amount of homework we set. So unfortunately or fortunately, our weapon for fighting this discrepancy between when we teach and when our learners actually learn can be negotiated if we plan. Planning ensures that the material is used in an efficient and effective way, and maximum learning outcomes are yielded. So what we need to do when we plan is not write down what we are going to do, which is what we do most of the time. So we write down, okay, page 22, exercise 6, page 25, and we write down what we are going to do. We don't really spend time thinking. There is little time for pedagogical deliberation onto how am I going to introduce this listening? How am I going to use this speaking? How am I going to get the learners to use new chunks of language? This can help us create flow so that each previous stage contributes to every next stage meaningfully, and there is actual communication. The language flows in the classroom, and we don't get learners who reply using one-word answers. This will also help us develop the learners' fluency. It's very important for us to think of what might hinder learning. So this reading that I have, what will stop my learners from understanding it? How can I pave their way towards it? And this is why backward planning works so well. By backward planning, Harmer, who introduced the term, explains that we need to think where we want our learners to be. So by the end of this lesson, my learning outcome is by the end of this lesson, learners will be able to use modals to give advice on matters related to doing homework. Just an example. This means that they need to be able to use should and know what this is accompanied by, ought to. They need to understand the difference between should and ought to and have to or must. They need to be able to use vocabulary such as do your homework the last minute or study the day before. So if I outline what I want my learners to master, I can better lead them to this point, and I can find ways to engage them and find the topic that will allow them to understand the language meaningfully from within, without me having to use too many terms and make the teaching too structured, let's say, too focused on structures. Planning also helps me ensure that my overall plan includes a little bit of everything, and that learners get to work in different interaction patterns. So I'm going to take you through some activities. The first one is that learning is personal. This activity has been adapted from Go-Getter 2, and the learners have to ask questions using the present perfect and the word ever. So have you ever been? There are some suggestions in the book, but some of these suggestions might be a bit foreign. So another way of going about this is to get learners to brainstorm activities that we do in our free time, but not something like sleep or even watch Netflix. It could be exciting things that we do. For example, if I have some free time, I like to go camping. So I try to go camping as frequently as much as I can. And they can now apply some think, pair, share. What is think, pair, share? The learners spend 1 minute thinking. This is the time when they can jot down their personal ideas. This means that when they turn to their pairs, they have something to contribute. During the pair work time, even the weaker students whose English may have been slightly problematic, who may not have produced enough, get ideas, and the stronger learners have not yet answered the questions which they could have answered some minutes ago. Finally, we have share, which is the time when all the students share their findings and the teacher can record answers on the whiteboard. If you're thinking, yes, but this is so time consuming, I will agree with you, it is time consuming. One good thing, it becomes less time consuming if we practice it quite often. Do students always think? The first part of this trio, some of them, especially my university students, tell me, I don't write these down, I have them in my head and I insist write them down because I want them to be clear about what they contribute, and because frankly, sometimes I don't believe them. Another solution that I could find about this is that we don't have to do it all the time. We can tell learners, quickly chat with the person sitting next to you about this and skip the think part. And sometimes we can ask each group to suggest one thing, not the full array of bullet points that they have come up with. This saves time, but it's a good way, it's a good tool to have in mind. So once the students have thought and they have shared ideas, they brainstorm ideas and the teacher records them on the whiteboard. And then we have personal things. So travel, try Chinese food, watch Netflix, play badminton, ride a horse, go-kart racing, anything that they might do, which is exciting. So now the teacher can ask the learners to take these ideas and create 3 questions. Have you ever traveled to Bali? Have you ever tried Chinese food? Okay, Chinese could change. Have you ever tried Thai food? Or have you ever tried Italian food? Have you ever tried Greek food? Then the learners create their mini questionnaires and they either interview each other or they can create questionnaires in teams. They can get up, interview, each group interviews the other, and then they present the other group's findings. This can work miracles if we are planning on creating posters and doing some sort of project, because we can create tables and they can tick and then we can count, and they can even create percentages with the help of the teacher. And they can say, so 75% of our class has traveled to Asia, 60% of our class has played badminton, and so on and so forth. So this is just a point of inspiration. There are many more things we can do. Might I say at this point that I love mini interviews because the learners get to work in pairs. It's very structured, it's easy to mount, they interview each other, and then they present their partners' ideas. So this gives them an idea, a better idea of their partner, and also they get to speak in public as well. Learning is social. So this is a vocabulary revision that combines should and should for advice. I will show you the photos in a minute. The learners have done a unit. This is for, let's say, A senior students, that would be A2 level. So the learners are young learners. They're around 10, 11. They are given photos of the food items. This helps learners whose reading skills are not great, who face dyslexia issues. So it's an inclusive task. And also it avoids spoon feeding because they have done the unit, they know the vocabulary items, they need to be able to understand. They need to prioritize, so we're working with higher order thinking skills. They need to understand which of this food is good for them, bad for them, or should be eaten in moderation. The learners work in groups. They decide where to put each of the dishes, and then the groups present their work. Of course, there is no right or wrong answer, unless we talk about, ice cream being a staple of our diet. And once they present their work, there is a next step. They reform and they present healthy eating programs. So let me show you the worksheet. The first page was the one with the pictures. That's a nice little quick vocabulary revision. Then the learners need to think, okay, we shouldn't eat pizza. Pizza is not bad for us, but we shouldn't eat pizza every day. Strawberries are good for us. We can eat them every day. You should eat eggs. We should eat eggs, but not too many. And then this part, the healthy eating plan. To be honest, to make it more experiential, I would like to find a class that would be willing to try out their healthy eating plan for a week. I haven't taken it this far, trust me, but they started with crazy things. So they put ice cream for every breakfast. Then I said, notice healthy eating stuff. So take a good look at your table, see where you have put which things are not bad for our health, which things are good for our health, and try to put them in the right proportions. So learning is cognitive, and of course, engagement is of great importance. This task has to do with oral presentations. It's been inspired by Perspectives on Proficiency, a book by published by Burlington Books. Burlington Books work with Spain, Cyprus, Greece. So I'm not sure if the Polish audience knows Burlington, but it's pretty big here, and they're a great publisher. So what we did in Unit 3 has to do with charities. Then they, once we finished the unit, they researched different charities, non-profit organizations. They presented their findings, and then we voted and selected which charity deserved our support. The greatest thing about it is that they collected money. We've just donated the money. I sent the money on Monday. The students supported the donation with their pocket money, and they had a reason for supporting the charity that was voted. So this shows that we take the topic of the course book out of its context, and we actually apply it in teaching. The next topic has to do with environmental problems. So this also is an example of topic unfamiliarity. This listening has to do with guerrilla gardens. Now, if I told my learners that we're going to do about guerrilla gardens, they would probably think about gorillas or zoos or endangered species. I don't think they would understand about the practice of people taking up unused allotments and turning them into mini vegetable gardens so that they can produce vegetables and fruit for people in areas where there are social problems and there is not enough money for shopping. So we started by discussing urban problems, environmental problems in modern cities. Some of the students mentioned pollution, others mentioned noise pollution, light pollution. They also mentioned that there are very few green spaces. And then I gave them an imaginary scenario. I gave them a huge store in the center of Athens, which is really one of the jewels of Syntagma Square. And I said, do you think anybody would agree to close down public and turn it into a garden in the center of Athens? And they all went like, no, miss, never. So we discussed why this couldn't happen. This led to a discussion about what makes green spaces so difficult to be found in the center of the city. And we ended up discussing vertical gardens and opportunities for buildings to become eco-friendly and rooftops being turned into gardens, which led us to discuss even more why there are spaces that have not been used and alternative ways for green spaces. So when the listening started, they had a pretty good idea of what guerrilla gardens are and how this topic relates to environmental problems and their solution. So the first listening was to check their hypothesis. I gave them a scenario. We have a huge park in our area that has been, how can I say, it hasn't been put to good use, mainly because of problems within different communities and different organizations. So I said, imagine if the municipality of Kalamaria gave us access to this field and it was broken into small patches of land that we could use as allotment. I would like to take a little bit of land and start cultivating my potatoes and my cucumbers and my tomatoes. And we started thinking along these lines. So when they listened to the audio, they had an idea of what this was about, and they just listened to verify their hypothesis. Now, in this unit, causatives are a very important point. So as you can understand, the person who had the idea to use the unused piece of land for as a vegetable allotment faced serious problems with the city council, and they were asked to remove these. So I used that to introduce the causative. So they wanted the plants removed. He got a gardener to remove the plants, and that was a recurring pattern, and it was used, the listening served as a springboard for the situational content of the causative. Learning is emotional, and this is what I meant when I said I will come back to how it feels to be passionate about something. I want my learners to have a voice, and I want them to be passionate about expressing this voice. One of the problems of our educational system is that despite the fact that we have such a long history, we keep teaching it in the most stale way, and students hate it. So, of course, this affects our understanding of the past and our voting habits. And this topic engages learners because they've been burned by history so many times. In their book, they had some comments. Supposedly, these are comments from a blog post. They had to explain why they dislike history, why studying history is beneficial. So we started by discussing the learners' views. Then they looked at the comments. They had a group discussion. And then we had the chance to explain how learning of history can be improved. And this led to an essay writing. So should learners learn history? What are the positive points of studying history as a subject? What are the points that make history a dreaded subject? How can we change that? And there were the parts of the essay that they needed to put together. So what do we gain from, let's say, flipping the way we teach? Well, first of all, our teaching process is more than a bunch of use of English tasks. Use of English is within the listening, it's supported by listening, it comes out of the listening, much like guerrilla gardens were combined with causative, much like it happens in language. We strive for communication and understanding, not so much for completion of tasks. We need to become more observant. We reflect on what works best and how we can better our practices. And this turns us into reflective practitioners who engage in action research. Personally, I feel that there is great food for thought in action research, informing our everyday teaching practice through what we read, through the training sessions that we participate in, and trying to use this data to create better practices gives us food for thought, but also creates best practices that work for me in my setting. Now, if other colleagues can benefit for that, then I will share it. I will write an article, I will write a blog post, I will present something, and this makes us more committed educators and, in a way, reflective practitioners. So personal engagement for learners and teachers is the key to all. Engagement of the learners will come if the lesson features balance of material, flow between the stages, and this can be ensured via planning. Planning ensures that I take diversity and diversification, diversity of the audience and diversification of the material into consideration. And to be honest, sometimes what the course book gives me is not what I need or what my learners need. If I need to simplify a reading task or a listening task for the benefit of my learners, I will do that. Adaptation can really work wonders. We need to wonder more and spend more time thinking about the topic of today's lesson, the context within which we're going to work, so that we can bring certain structures or vocabulary for discussion. And this top-down way of working informs our practices better. We need to think of how we are going to involve our learners. in the context they're going to discuss, and use this to extract the language so that we can get the learner wholly involved, bodily, their mind and their emotion, learners who are safe in their environment. Some people say that, you know, no matter what you do, learners will be bored. Yeah, well, there are Mondays that I don't want to teach either. And there are days when my head hurts or something has happened and I'm too busy and I just don't want to teach. Let's embrace this and let's try to create a different style of teaching for that day. I don't think that boredom goes hand in hand with a multitude of stimuli. It is usually found where there are too few stimuli. There is absence of stimulus and repetition that creates this. So this is my modest bibliography, my bardzo was dziękuję, and I won't say do zobaczenia, I will say keep in touch, and let me see how many questions I've got, because at some point I stopped looking at the questions. So let me go back to the beginning. So a song with a structure followed by story, then questions. Yes, great idea. Songs work so well, and they are the reason why movement can also get into our teaching. Now, movement is very important because it makes learners avoid creating comfortable nooks in the classroom and take a little nap while we're teaching. Learning without exams. Oh my God, does it ever exist? I think we are plagued by exams. Anna, you know the problem. Rote learning here in Greece, we cannot get out of rote learning, and unfortunately our learners and their parents are confused. They do not understand that university entrance exams and language learning exams have nothing to do with each other. University entrance exams are knowledge tests. Our exams are aptitude tests, and unless we develop our learners' abilities to use their language and their skills, they won't be able to use language in their lives. And then it becomes a very, how can I put it, just a qualification. I have the C2 or I have the B2, but I can't speak English. Thank you so much, and over to Lucina.
Thank you, Maria. It's been highly inspirational session. I've been making notes myself just to be able to reflect on them later on, because you've given us so much that it really stimulates intellectual processes in the brains of the listeners. So thank you very much. And I have one final question for you. How is it in Greece right now? Are you in Greece or are you in...
I am in Greece, yes. The situation with COVID is pretty dismal. I am going to make a sideways comment for my Athenian friends. We haven't heard a lot about the pandemic because it snowed in Athens, so all we get is snow news.
Yes.
Athens was snowed under, and that meant that everything closed down for 2 days. We are so jealous here in the north that it snows in the south, but doesn't matter. The situation with COVID and the Omicron strain is that we've got some people who have been vaccinated, around 70% of the population, but more is needed and it's not coming yet. So we are trying, but it's very cold. So, you know, it's very Polish right now. The weather is sunny in Thessaloniki, but it's it's frosty cold. So it's been great to reconnect with all my Polish friends. Thank you so much, and see you again at the conference and hopefully face to face. Spread some comeback Maria dust whenever you get the chance. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Do zobaczenia.
Do zobaczenia.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.